Zionist movement in 1881. That's the beginning of the modern Zionist movement. There have been Zionist type movements before. The hugest one was, of course, we discussed in another series, the false messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, claims he's the messiah, he's going to, and Jews worldwide believed in him. In any case, all of them, from all of them, before 1881, nothing came from it. This is the beginning of the modern Zionist movement. So, aside from, we discussed Leon Pinsker, but aside from him, there's another Jewish student that about the same time, during the pogroms of 1881, wrote this, his realization. The recent pogroms have violently awakened the complacent Jews from their sweet slumbers. Until now, I was uninterested in my origin. I saw myself as a faithful son of Russia, which was to me my raison d'etre and the very air I breathed. Each new discovery by Russian scientists, every classical literary work, and there were a lot of them at the time, every victory of the Russian kingdom would fill my heart with pride. I wanted to devote my whole strength to the good of my homeland and happily to do my duty, meaning to go to fight, to go to the military. And then suddenly they came out and showed us the door, and they openly declared that we are free to leave for the West. By the West, he meant the US and Western Europe. But unlike the later Soviet Union, the Russian Empire was very interested in Jews finding reasons to leave.
Good for the Jews.
I'm sorry?
Good for the Jews.
Well, for those who left.
Yeah,
Because, yeah,
No,
because the majority
everybody
didn't.
had money.
Yeah, right. Renee.
So there were pogroms in around 1881, right?
That's the big series of pogroms began. Completely government, we'll talk more about it, but completely government sponsored.
What were the reasons for those pogroms? What were the Jews
What was happening
this
between,
time?
in 1881, Alexander II was assassinated. That was part of a lot of events that were happening. The Russian society, there was a small Russian middle class that wanted to be more like the West. And, people we're mentioning now who were intellectuals or students were very active in it. And the government usually, in order to pacify the population at large, usually anything they were, any issue was kind of deflected to the Jews. And I'll talk more about it, right? In fact, now, in a few minutes.
So the government blamed the Jews for any unrest that was going on?
Well, for the reason for the unrest. Let me read on, and then if you still have the question, I'll get more into it. But I am going to talk exactly about that. Give me a couple of
It
minutes.
should be a simple, they were being blamed for...
Yes, but it's not that simple. Let me continue. Anyway,
Kill the Christ. Yeah.
so,
Christ killers. That's it.
in any case, the student I'm talking about, his name is Kisin, also founded what began as a student organization called BILU. BILU is an acronym that stands for a verse from the Bible that basically said, it's very rough translation, the house of Israel will stand forever. In any case, he ended up also, Bilu eventually founded more, eventually after this, ended up, they became more than just a student movement, they also started founding settlements in Palestine. So a lot of settlements, there are claims both by Bilu people at the time and people from Chovevei Zion, each claimed that they founded those colonies, but they both were founding colonies in Palestine. So, in 1890 and 1891, Chovevei Zion and Bilu groups founded the settlement of Rehovot, Hadera, and Mishmar Yarden. That's by 1890. In 1897, when Theodore Herzl, I will also get to Theodore Roosevelt, that's why I got confused. When Theodore Herzl convened the first Zionist Congress in Basel, both Bilu and Chovevei Zion disbanded and joined to make it a one large Zionist movement and to make sure it's headed in the West, not in Russia. Okay.
Good move.
Very good move, very safe move, yes. So we arrived at the end of the 19th century. Probably the greatest modern Jewish historian is a historian named Shimon Dubnov. He wrote in Yiddish, but he's translated to Hebrew and English among many other languages. Anyways, he referred to that era, the end of the 18th, early 19th century until World War I, he referred to it as the era, the period of the second reaction. Second reaction to, against what? Remember, throughout the late 18th and throughout the 19th century, Jews in more Western European communities have been gaining their rights as citizens. And at this point, remember, we're talking about the period when the Dreyfus trial was going on. There were events very similar in both Germany and Austria. There was the beginning in both Germany and Austria of very anti-Semitic right-wing parties. So Dubnov referred to this as the era of the second reaction to the Jewish emancipation. In other words, the reaction by the surrounding world to Jewish emancipation and Jews becoming equal citizens. So he referred to that era as the era of the second reaction. Should be obvious why, whether you see assimilation as a positive or a negative, for the majority of the world's Jewish population, assimilation at this period still was not a solution. And I don't want to get very deeply into what was going on in the United States. I'll mention it shortly in the coming classes. But in the United States, there were more and more hindrance against mass migration by Jews and in general by East European and South Europeans.
Approximate what date was this? 18?
This was before World War I and early in the 20th century.
Or by after the 20th century?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, remember, this was that time, the rubber baron era here was also a time of mass migration, and big business wanted mass migration. You know, they wanted cheap labor, and now comes the reaction to the mass migration. So, in any case,
In 1913, my grandfather was able to come with no problem at all through Ellis Island, and he was one of these dirty Jews from Eastern Europe, from
He was late.
the Ukraine, 1913.
okay, well, you know what, I was going to give you this last week. I didn't have the copier available, still don't have a copier, but I copied these now. I copied basically on one side, the cover of Pinsker's pamphlet, Auto-Emancipation. As you can see, it's in Russian. It's not a very good copy, but
We all read
it gives
Russian.
you an idea. This is a copy of the original manuscript.
You read it.
On the other side, I
We had a
put
translator.
the preface. So if you want to pass that one down,
Why? It's in Russian?
no.
Oh, I thought you said it's in Russian. She's the only
I
one that
said
reads
that
Russian.
the picture shows that it was written originally in German, not in Russian. But the other side is very much in English. Okay? All right, so let me very quickly, here, you can pass
Look
the
at the
rest.
typewriter. Do that.
Stop.
Oh,
Stop from both sides, it runs with the extras. So basically, after the terror of the bloody atrocities, a moment of calm followed for the baiter and the baited to catch their breath. In any case, I'm skipping most of it. I'm going to the last paragraph, which here I did not separate as a paragraph, but it's the last couple of sentences. Shut your eyes and hide your head like an ostrich. There is to be no lasting peace unless in the fleeting interval of relaxation you apply a remedy more thoroughgoing than those palliatives to which our helpless people have been turning for 2,000 years. So basically, the only solution that he saw was a return to the only place that Jews can agree on, which was
What year?
Eretz Israel,
What year?
1881.
Palestine.
I'm sorry?
What year this was written? 1881.
And that's Pinsker? Or not?
Pinsker, yes. All right, so
But he was not from Pinsk.
now, as I said, in the West also, there was more and more feeling that assimilation had been failing them as well, the Jews of the West as well. And I'm talking mostly about Western Europe, which had 2 million Jews. The United States had 1.5 million before World War I. So, in the Russian Empire, where most of the world's Jews lived, you may recall from last week that Odessa was the only major Russian city where Jews were allowed to live. Now, we talked about Jews in Warsaw, we mentioned originally, I mentioned it some more today, Kishinev, you know, all those were cities, were large cities. And they were in the Russian Empire, but they were not Russian cities, which Odessa was. Although it was in Ukraine, but it was basically founded as a Russian city, you know. Ukraine was not seen by the government, certainly, as a separate country. Now, so Odessa was the only major Russian city where Jews were allowed to live. In fact, not only Russians, but also Greeks and Jews were among the founders of the city of Odessa.
It was a port, wasn't it?
Jewish Greeks?
I'm sorry?
Jewish Greeks or just Greek?
No,
Greek?
Greek,
Okay.
and Jews. Remember, it's Southeastern Europe.
And Odessa's
Okay.
on the water.
Yeah, it's.
Now-
And it
Yeah,
had
let's
access.
see.
Yeah.
There was a lot, remember, Odessa, the area of Odessa was taken originally from the Ottoman Empire by the Russians. And before that, the area was a Greek area that was ruled by, a Greek area that was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, as was most of what later became Yugoslavia, all the countries that it is today.
Turkey?
I'm sorry? No, but ruled by the Ottoman Empire. So, the area of Odessa was taken from the Ottoman Empire by the Russians.
Okay.
Okay,
But
now,
the thing, just one note about Odessa, what I remember, it had a huge Jewish cultural.
very much.
Yeah.
And wasn't Isaac Stern or one of these guys?
Isaac Stern, yes.
As a baby, as a prodigy.
Bialik. I can mention a whole bunch
But the
of
musician-
very important Jewish intellectuals that
Who was the musician that was sent to perform for the Tsar or something like that at that time? Was it Isaac Stern or?
No,
No, not for the
No, Stern was
But,
recent.
anyways, that's
Yeah.
a side note, but bottom line is
Big deal.
that Jews felt at home in Odessa, and it's the only Russian city that could be said.
It was the hinterland. They didn't care about it in Moscow.
It had the best climate too, didn't it?
In any case,
It's warm.
in 1905 there was a huge pogrom in Odessa. Now it wasn't the first one in Odessa, but it was a very major pogrom, and which makes sense. In 1905, that was part of the events that we came to refer to as the 1905 revolution, which wasn't a real organized revolution movement as it was in 1917, in the two revolutions of 1917. That pogrom was the worst one in the history of Odessa, in the short history of Odessa at the time. Within less than a week, between October 18th and 22nd of 1905, ethnic Russians, Ukrainians, and Greeks killed over 400 Jews and damaged or destroyed over 1,600 Jewish properties. Now, why would...
They do more today.
What's that?
Never mind.
Okay, no. In any case,
You started to say, what, I'm interested still in why 1881, why 1905? Who initiated the pogrom? Is it
1905 was
church? Is it
I just said
military?
why 1905.
Yeah, but you didn't say, you don't say why. What was you say the pogroms, but there's
Okay.
a reason why what's the excuse?
I will get a little bit into
Well,
that.
yeah.
Believe me, I still will, if you let me.
Was it the church that initiated it? Was it the military? Was it the political people?
It was the government, the military, and the police, okay? Renee, do me a favor, let me get to it, because I
Why?
can't
You don't say
otherwise.
why.
Give him a
I
chance.
won't get to it if I talk about it now.
You said that about 1881.
No, this,
1881 was the obvious. The Tsar was assassinated. Instead of being angry at the Tsar, they deflected it to the Jews.
The Jews were blamed. Okay,
Okay,
that's one
but
reason.
Renee, let me finish
Yeah, but
to where I talked about that
It's a
last
simple
week.
answer.
Last week I talked about it for about over half an hour last week, about 1881. And I don't want to
I know.
repeat myself.
Were you here last That's
Renee.
Renee,
Let-
right.
let's
Taking him
continue.
off this track.
And
I know,
if,
okay,
in the
okay.
end, if I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
get to
yeah.
your answer,
Why?
come back to it, okay?
Why? That's the question.
So,
I know this
first of
festival
all,
well, 'cause my dad
everybody
was
know,
there.
does everybody know why Pesach
22 Jews.
slash
And the history
Easter
books don't give you
are the
any
times that, right times for pogroms, basically?
Killing of
Is
Christ.
everybody familiar with the
Sure.
reasons?
Christ killed.
Is anybody not familiar? Okay. Well, start with Easter. What is Easter celebrating?
Resurrection of Jesus.
The crucifixion,
Crucifixion.
you know,
Oh, that's good.
And- and the rise. But who betrayed
The
Jesus?
Jews.
Well,
Jews.
it's not one Jew, it's the Jews.
Right.
And that's being remembered on Easter.
Right.
At the same time, the Jews celebrate Passover. Remember, the Last Supper, which is the time of Easter, you know, Last Supper was a Seder dinner. So,
Judas.
so they added to the whole Easter story that on that evening when we celebrate Easter and they celebrate Passover, Jews kill Christian children and use their blood to bake matzahs.
Babies.
That started, that blood libel
Right.
began in the early Middle Ages, and in Russia, and it usually is part of the medieval world.
Is that where?
In Russia was still in the medieval world at that time, and in Russia it persisted.
You still exist.
So, sometime in early 1903,
Still believe
just
in Detroit.
before
Many people.
Easter and Passover of that year, a Ukrainian boy was murdered about 25 miles north of Kishinev. Kishinev was the capital of Bessarabia, later one of the Soviet republics. So, around the same time, a young girl in Kishinev committed suicide in the city by poisoning herself.
Why?
A teenager,
Oh, okay.
okay?
Those kids, you can't count on them.
She was taken to a Jewish hospital
Wait.
and pronounced dead on arrival.
Uh-oh.
Bad news. A series of allegations began by the two major newspapers of the region. I doubt if those are the same newspapers are still publishing, but they were called, one was called Basarabets, and the other was called Svet. Svet means light. Am I right? Okay. So, those articles insinuated that both children, there was no suicide, and both children were murdered by Jews for the purpose of baking matzahs.
Yay.
These allegations sparked a riot with the urging of the Russian Orthodox bishop of the city. By the way, the Russian church always instigated blood libel accusations and anti-Jewish riots. And almost certainly into the Soviet era, and I'm not going to go into it in the Soviet era, that they were also very anti-Semitic, but they didn't have the power that they had under the Tsar. In any case, the first Kishinev pogrom started on Sunday, Easter Sunday, April 19th. Okay? After the Christian population of the country got out of church. Okay? Easter services. It spent 3 days of rioting against Jews. So 120 Jews in that city were killed in Kishinev. 92 were severely wounded, 500 slightly wounded, so it's about 600 wounded. 120 killed, and over 700 houses and just about all Jewish-owned businesses were destroyed. According to, so this is, according to the New York Times of April 28th, 1903, so April 28th, just following Easter, okay? According to that issue of the New York Times, the Russian Minister of Interior instructed the governor of Bessarabia not to stop the rioters, as long as they concentrated on the Jews. Now, here is a description of that pogrom from that issue, from that op-ed in the New York Times. Okay? The anti-Jewish riots in Kishinev, Bessarabia are worse than the censor will permit me to publish. There was a well laid out plan for the general massacre of Jews on Monday following Russian Easter. The mob had been led by priests, and the general cry, "Kill the Jews," was taken up all over the city. The Jews were taken wholly unaware and were slaughtered like sheep. The dead that lay numbered that day, the dead on that day numbered 120, and the injured 500. The scene of horror attending this massacre are beyond description. Babies were literally torn to pieces by the frenzied, bloodthirsty mob. The local police made no attempt to check the reign of terror. At sunset, the streets were piled with corpses and wounded. Those who could make their escape fled in terror, and the city was now practically devoid of any Jews. Okay. In both Yiddish and Hebrew, the city name Massacre became a term for a major pogrom. It became the first Kishinev pogrom.
Can you spell the city?
Kishinev, just the way it sounded, Kishinev, Kishinev.
N-E-V. Became
Basically a
slogan,
term for
a slogan
major massacre. So, for any Jew, it was, when there was a big pogrom, after that they would say it was practically a Kishinev, So, President Roosevelt mentioned it. So I said I'll come back to Roosevelt, that's Teddy, not FDR. In his corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, following the 1903-04 Venezuela, there was a crisis in Venezuela that the United States got involved in, and he gave a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine in which he used an example of when would the United States get involved. He used the Kishinev pogroms as an example of the type of extreme human rights abuse that would justify a United States intervention.
No kidding. Wow.
Within a few months, Jews started returning to Kissinger, but then in October 19th and 20 of 1905, another pogrom began. Initially, this riot had nothing to do, it started as a riot that has nothing to do with Jews. It was a riot against, it started as a political protest against the Tsar. There were no non-violent protests in Russia because the protests were forbidden. So any protest became a violent protest. But the government agents provocateurs managed to turn the riot into an attack on the Jews. By the time it was over, 19 more Jews had been killed and 56 more were injured. Now, following the first pogrom, there was a beginning of organizing self-defense brigades throughout the Pale of Settlement.
Where's Kishinev located?
In Bessarabia,
Belarus. Is
not Belarus, Bessarabia,
Now it's Moldova.
Moldova.
Is the map gonna help us at all, Nathan? If we
I
put it
can
down?
point it to, but you really know.
Yeah, I really like maps.
So if the Jews had stayed on their farms and not gone to the cities, they would have been better off.
They don't have farms.
They don't have farms, it's against the law.
Get to farms,
You
I'll get
couldn't,
to the issue of farms in a minute.
Good.
Why didn't, what about the Jewish farmers?
you could,
What about Jews in the villages? Well, I'll get to that in a minute.
There's Ukraine.
there were no Jewish farmers, hardly.
Oh,
Against the
Belarus.
law.
A lot of pogroms in the small places too.
Yeah, it was easy.
Belarus or
No, that's Belarus,
Yeah.
that's not it.
Moldova,
Moldova?
Moldova.
Moldova.
Yes,
Moldavia.
Small one in yellow. Small one in
Small yellow.
Really
Below,
small, really
It's
small.
below
right-
Hungary.
That's
No,
it.
no, no, no.
No?
No.
Oh, here it is. Okay. I'm not that good at it either.
There it is,
Okay.
yep.
At this particular geography.
Yeah.
But this, it's right here, where you see the triangle,
Yeah.
little red triangle. Anyway,
Romania. Moldova. Does it exist today?
Yeah.
yeah,
oh yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
real close to
It's
Odessa.
it's an independent country that's very closely allied with Russia.
Not really now.
Well, it depends, but had been, yeah, had been. There's all kinds of things. You heard the rumor that Putin is dead, right?
Oh, yeah. It's
Okay.
every month, you know.
So they're all, unfortunately, it always turns out to have been exaggerated, yeah. Okay, so, in any case, there were Jewish self-defense unit, and that's the big difference. But they couldn't, there was a limit to how much they could do. By October 30th of 1905, following the unrest of that year, Tsar Nikolai II, under the influence of Count Sergei Witte, issued a very important, historically very important manifesto, the 1905 Manifesto, also known as in Russian history, I believe it's referred to as the October Manifesto, right? And it pledged some basic civil rights.
What year?
1905,
Okay.
October 1905. So, the Kishinev pogroms were part of a much larger series of 600 pogroms that swept the Russian Empire during 1905 and immediately following the October Manifesto. Now, the official name that the Russian government gave to the October Manifesto was the Manifesto on the Improvement of State Order. You know, it was a document, it was the precursor of of what became, you know, the first Duma, the first, the first constitution, of the Russian Empire. So, following the manifesto, here is the government, the Russian government, because as you notice, as I showed you, there was worldwide publicity to the Kishinev pogroms. And this is the Russian government's explanation, official explanation, okay? There is in Russia, like in Germany and in Austria, a feeling against certain of the Jews, in other words, some Jews, you know. The reason for this unfriendly attitude is found in the fact that Jews refuse to work in the field or engage in agriculture. Now, why the Jews refuse to engage in agriculture? They're not allowed to own land. They can't engage in agriculture except as workers, which some
They
did.
can work on it.
Yeah, but in any case, there was no such thing as a Jewish farmer because it was not allowed. But the Jews refused to engage in other words, they refused to do anything productive, is the bottom line of this, what I'm saying. The situation in Russia, so far as Jews are concerned, is just this. It is not a Russian against the Jew, but rather the peasant against the moneylender. There is no national religious feeling against the Jew in Russia. It is, as we said, the Jew ruins the peasant, with the result that conflict occurs when the latter had lost all their worldly possessions and had nothing to live on. There are many good Jews in Russia, and they are respected. The Russian government affords the same protection to Jews that it does to any other citizen. And when a riot occurs, the Jews are attacked, the officials immediately take steps to apprehend those who began the riot and visit their punishment upon them.
When was that written?
Total baloney.
Yeah.
But that's the official government explanation. So we've seen why the Tsarist government actually kept fanning the fan of general fear and discontent and hatred of Jews to always deflect the public mistrust of the government, aiming it at the Jew. And it wasn't difficult. The peasantry, the urban workers, which weren't that many in Russia, percentage-wise, at that time, were very easy to lead. You're in trouble. Look who's causing it. Look, they are living well. Look at you.
Same similarity in Nazi Germany, same thing, deflecting to
Well,
the Jews. Yeah.
Yeah. So, although the October Manifesto granted some basic right to the Russian people, it did not guarantee that the Russian government would function in a democratic way. Instead, the manifesto just stated that people had basic rights and a voice in legislation. That proclamation was followed by the first Russian constitution, as I said, and almost immediately the Russian government began to minimize its actual effects as far as the general population was concerned. So as I mentioned, between the October Manifesto and the outbreak of World War I, over 600 pogroms took place all over the Pale of settlements, where there were many Jews and where they were concentrated. Again, as I said, very, very few Jews were allowed to live outside the Pale. Okay? So there was no Jewish community in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, later Petrograd,
Natan, show me where Odessa is. Can you do
Odessa
that?
is in Ukraine.
Black Sea.
That's an easy one. Okay.
Right next to Moldova and the Black Sea.
Ukraine. Let's see. Should be.
It's on the coast?
It's not in huge.
Yeah.
No, it's not
It
in
is on the
huge
coast.
letters.
It's a port.
It's a port.
Yeah.
Near the
It's
water.
back on the Black Sea.
On the coast.
Down, down.
No, I know, but
What is Black Sea?
it's okay. It's on the Black Sea, but
Okay, that's all.
so, this is Crimea here, and
It's right across
don't
from
see
Crimea.
the actual site of Odessa, but it's on
Yeah.
the Black Sea,
Yeah,
and it's right around here.
Yeah, close to Moldova.
okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so, and now I'm getting to the last thing on that topic would be the Beilis affair. Anybody here heard of the Beilis affair?
Sure.
Beilis, spell it for me.
That means B-E-I-L-I-S, Beilis.
B-E-I-L-I-S.
Never even heard of
Uh,
it.
No,
Wow.
everybody in Russia knows.
Beilis.
That was,
Yeah, something.
okay. During the Kishinev pogroms,
That was a sexual affair with, never mind.
not that kind of affair. During the Kishinev pogroms, the government had no issue about exploiting the old medieval belief in blood libel. I already mentioned that, right? Okay, so, and I explained what the belief entails. Now, it was still very prevalent in Russia. I suspect it's still at least somewhat prevalent in Russia to date. Russia and Ukraine, probably. The Kishinev pogroms were not the last attempt to using that belief. You know, on March 12, 1911, a 13-year-old Russian boy named Andrei Yushinsky disappeared on his way to school. 8 days later, his body was found mutilated in a cave near a brick factory in Kiev. Kiev, remember, is the capital of Ukraine. And Jews did live in Kiev. It's not a Russian city. Okay, so the superintendent of the factory was a man named Menachem Mendel Beilis. He was arrested on July 21st, 1911, after, and this will come as an answer to your question, Renee. So let me know after this if it didn't. In July 21st, 1911, after a lamplighter testified, remember, you know what lamplighters used to be? Before electric lighting, gas lighting, and the lamplighter had to light everyone at dark, at the beginning of pre-dark, yeah.
That's where my name comes from, Lichtman.
Liftman, okay, yeah, there you go. You must have some in your ancestry, yeah. Okay, so, he testified that he witnessed the boy kidnapped by a Jew. A report was submitted to the Tsar by the judiciary, naming Beilis as the murderer of Yushinsky. Now, a Kiev police detective, interestingly, named Nikolai Krasovsky, decided to investigate the actual cause. Now, initially he bought the story, but he just started investigating it. He immediately was ordered by the police to to drop the investigation. He refused. When he insisted on continuing, he was threatened, this time not by the police, but by the Okhrana, which is the governmental secret police. Okay, those are the forgers of, well, you saw last week, of the Elders of Zion manifesto. So, in any case, Krasovsky persisted in following his leads to solve the murder. He was dismissed from the police. He was a very stubborn man, and he continued after his dismissal. He continued his investigation privately, and he found the real murder. He found the real murder. A school friend of the boy who murdered the kid together with his mother's aid.
Oh, yeah. The boy's mother's aid?
She
Yeah.
helped
A boy and his mother
She helped him.
murdered Yushinsky. Got it? Okay. Now, yet, even with proof of the actual murder, the Kiev district attorney persisted in persecuting the case as a ritual murder. Committed by Beilis, of course. After being jailed over 2 years without a trial, Beilis was tried over a period of 4 weeks in September and October of 1913 amid national and international attention. And that's what the Russian government doesn't appreciate. When it's okay to do it, they don't like international attention. Now,
Wonder why.
at that point, a lot of Russian intellectuals got into it and started speaking against the false accusation. It includes Maxim Gorky, Russian novelist, Vladimir Korolenko, Alexander Blok, Alexander Kuprin, many others. I have about 10 names here that published things against, the accusation of Beilis.
Was it dangerous for them to do that?
I'm sorry?
Was it dangerous for them to do that?
For
To take
well-known Russian
this-
intellectuals,
It was okay.
they're not Jewish.
But they're not Jewish.
No.
None of them are Jewish. Okay, that's not.
It would involve going against the intelligentsia,
Okay.
in which they did not want to go to. Okay. The prosecution included some of the Russian Empire's leading anti-Semitic activists. And the government's chief witness was an expert on Jewish religion. He was a Catholic priest,
Of course you know.
okay, that claimed to be an expert, not even an Orthodox priest, but that was deliberate too. During cross-examination by the defense, several of the witnesses retracted their earlier statements on the stand, while other witnesses clearly stated that their conviction that it was Yushinsky's friend Cheberyak and his mother who were really to blame for the murder.
That was true.
Which was true, which they had proof of. Okay, and then the main, the chief witness of the prosecution, that was the lamplighter, whose testimony was initially used to indict Beilis, confessed that his testimony was actually induced by the Ochrana. That the Ochrana forced him to make the accusation. Archival documents reveal that the jury was rigged and monitored throughout the trial, and some witnesses, such as the original lamplighter, were both bribed and threatened by the secret police. Nevertheless, in its verdict, the Jewish found that Beilis was innocent, but the murder was done by Jewish was really a Jewish ritual murder, just not by him.
What?
In any case, although Beilis, it was kind of a way to save face. Well, nobody's guilty, because, but it wasn't Beilis, nobody's guilty, but the Jews still really do it because they did it. Although Beilis' acquittal was a cause for celebration, it demonstrated clearly that the Russian government, its legal system, had in effect put a stamp of approval on basically the oldest blood libel in Europe. And the affair contributed to the general feeling of hopelessness among Russian Jews in the years before leading to the First World War and the Russian revolutions. Upon being freed, Beilis left Kiev and settled for a while in Palestine. Eventually, in 1926, he wrote his memoir in New York. So eventually, he moved to from Palestine to the United States.
Good move.
Now, Bernard Malamud, how many people have read or are familiar with The Fixer? The Fixer, Bernard Malamud's novel, is basically the story of Beilis, of Menachem Mendel Beilis. Which, by the way, you know, won both a Pulitzer Prize and a National Book Award. Now, so you see the problem where majority of the Jews live in the Russian Empire. Now, the neighboring East European countries, such as Romania, for example, not so much Yugoslavia or the countries that became Yugoslavia, but Romania is equally anti-Semitic, had been, but the majority of the Jews lived under the Tsar. And it was clear that, well, how they were living and why they couldn't continue to live that way became very clear. But what about Western European Jews? Remember, 2 million Jews lived in Western Europe, Western and Central Europe, I should say, and 1.5 million lived throughout the United States. The great Jewish historian, as I said, Simon Dubnow, referred to this, the era of the second reaction, and the European Jews were coming to an era that they also became dubious about whether assimilation is really working for them. And we'll take it from that next week. So, first of all, did I answer your question or not?
Yeah, it took it's always the church that initiates it, because every week, every week you
At
have
this point,
Jesus.
in Russia, it wasn't simple. Yeah, the church invented it. Anti-Semitism is a Christian creation.
Of course.
It began with when the Roman Empire became Christian. Period.
Right.
Because before that, you know, by the way, despite common stories, Constantine the Great, who he did not make Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. That was Theodosius after him. But Constantine the Great's mother was Christian. Her name was Helen. But to become Christian, she had to convert to Judaism. That's pre-Christian type of, pre-Christian Rome type of Christianity, which was basically part of the Jewish religion. So, as it became more common among Roman citizens, Constantine separated from the Jewish religion as a separate religion and made it legal. In any case, as I said, anti-Semitism begins with Christianity because it's based on the Jews taking on themselves. It's not that, all the Jews participated, but they announced, the elders announced, according to the New Testament, not as any type of historical fact, that, the Pontius Pilate wanted to free Jesus, and he said no, and they said no, he is guilty, and if there's any punishment for it, it's on us and our descendants, period. So all Jews from then on are responsible, and that's the beginning of anti-Semitism.
Natan, I gotta applaud you, you're laying a nice foundation to understanding how each step goes. Exactly. Very good
Thank you.
foundation. Very good.
Okay.
All righty.
Anybody want to say anything, if you want to stay from which thousands, tens of thousands in the two major revolts, were exiled and sold to slavery in Rome. There have been other less major revolts. The final Jewish revolt was sometimes in the 10th century. So there were Jews were still, despite the exiles, still a major part of the population of Palestine. During the Crusade, there was a Jewish army fighting in Palestine on the side of the Muslims against the Crusaders.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The city of Haifa was defended, was a walled town. We wouldn't call it a city at that time, but it was a walled town defended by Jews, not by Muslims. They were very much part of the Muslim resistance in Palestine
Thank you.
to the Crusades.
Thank you.
So I'm going to give you, maybe I'll give it next week, Toby, from the late 19th century to the beginning of the state of Israel, in other words, to 1994, the population, the Jewish population, the population growth. So before the first Aliyah begins in 1881, and it was Aliyah mostly from the Russian Empire, but not only. It just so happened that with the rumor of Jews returning to Palestine, Jews in the Middle East started coming. So a large part of the population of Yemen. Yemen was at the time the country with the largest Jewish population in the Arab world, and a large segment of the urban Jewish population, because they were not by any means all urban. Urban means mostly from Sana'a. The other big city, Aden or Aden in English, was not part of the Kingdom of Yemen at that time, but it also has a large. It was held by Britain, but also had a large Jewish population. But the majority of the Jews that came from Yemen as part of the first Aliyah that joined the Russians in the first Aliyah were from Sana'a, which is the capital and largest city of Yemen.
Thank you. It just gives me some
And then
orientation.
later on there will be more contingents coming from Yemen until by 1950 there are very few Jews living in Yemen. And there are still Jews leaving Yemen today. Of course, due to the ones that are left over, which are the ones that are living basically among tribes,
Are they going to Israel?
And they're migrating,
To Israel?
interestingly enough, the Lubavitch movement has adopted the Jews of Yemen. And any Jews of, why? Come to us, don't go to the Zionists. Don't go to Palestine. So, for the most part, the few Jews that still come out of Yemen end up in New York.
So they're going to New York.
In Brooklyn.
They're not going to Israel.
No,
Okay.
they have no reason to and they have no means to. Because Jews that want to immigrate to the United States are helped by Lubavitch.